Welcome to today's discussion. I'm Sava and Nemanja, head of HealthTech at HTEC Group, and I have the unique honor of seeing innovations and technologies across the entire patient pathway, as well as through healthcare organizations that are geared to deliver, pay, and manage for that care. Today's podcast is the first of a longer series that covers the so what around healthcare innovation. And the target audience, which we hope you are, is anyone with a vested interest in the trends, but with a practical stance. The themes will cover, go over the shininess, the who cares, and the real substantive advances and work that are accelerating across all of healthcare. It's an amazing time, and we hope that your output after listening to these podcasts is a better understanding, as well as some arming you with tools and data that can help make better decisions for you when dealing with health tech. In today's episode, we'll be discussing black boxes and white boxes, which are increasingly becoming a focal point in technology development in healthcare. So research in deep learning often combines various health data systems and creates a potential to redefine healthcare delivery. But a lot of times when dealing with large amounts of data and novel kind of models, people struggle with the issue of explainability and adapting to a specific problem. So when we take AI, for instance, there's resistance to using medical AI because both of subjective difficulty of understanding the algorithms, skepticism, and what people see as a black box of how does this AI really function. And so to address this today, we're going to have Nemanja Kovačev, who's our medtech expert at HTEC Group. And we're going to go through a discussion today. I'll have a brief intro, Nemanja, of his background, and then we'll get into this discussion about white boxes and black boxes. Nemanja.
Hi, Sava. Thank you for having me. I'm, as you said, a medtech domain expert here at HTEC Group. I'm also an orthopedic and trauma surgeon with a PhD in orthopedic surgery and digital health. I specialized in AI in healthcare at Stanford University, and I'm happy to discuss today with you those points.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. So why is AI specifically interesting in healthcare, separate from all these other industries?
Well, for the first time in history, now we both have a huge amount of data in healthcare generated from different sources, and also processing power to process all the data and make some conclusions out of it. So the AI is a perfect tool for that.
And so, but why? We've had, in drug discovery, there's been large data sets before. What makes it different today?
Computing power. Now you can make more and more complex algorithms, get more data processed, and more people are coming into the field. So that all enables innovation and different breakthroughs in different areas.
There's been a lot of technology work in fields like fintech and automotive self-driving systems and AI, and looking at things like map predictions and routings and learning your behaviors, and especially in the marketing realm of doing kind of omni-channel prediction. A lot of these models, people say, okay, we're training how to recognize a cat versus a dog. Why doesn't that translate to healthcare?
Well, healthcare first is specific because it deals with health, with people. In plain words, like if you have a cat mislabeled as a dog and the AI wrongly presumed it's a dog or something like that, nothing basically will happen. But if an AI and at a crucial diagnostics or therapy place makes a wrong decision, it can have serious repercussions. And healthcare is traditionally very resistant to changes. Changes happen slow. There is no disruption. There is no go fast and break things. That doesn't work in healthcare. It works in different industries, but not in healthcare. So that's the initial problem here.
I mean, is it ubiquitous that all these practitioners are resistant to AI, or the ones that embrace AI versus ones that don't embrace in healthcare? What separates them?
Well, practitioners in general are wary of new things because in history for me, I worked for years as a full-time practitioner, and now I'm working part-time. It happened a lot of times that we got a new tool, a new system that only made more obligations for us. It loaded more work on our shoulders. So whenever we hear something new, innovative, something that will make breakthroughs, we are very careful. So the adoption rate is always low on the practitioner side.
So should we be wary of practitioners who embrace AI? What's different? Like, what about the subset that is leaning forward? Like, what do we say about those kind of practitioners?
Yeah, well, those are first adopters. Those are people who are into technology, who understand what that is. So, as all new things, you have first adopters that understand and go towards it, and people who lag in adoption.
So maybe let's kind of just three good examples of where AI shows a lot of promise right now in healthcare. What would you say are the best, really demonstratable opportunities right now that are happening?
Yeah, well, as you already mentioned, like drug discovery, it's huge. It's cut time. A great amount of time of your both initial discovery, like sifting through large numbers of molecules, potential medications, and all the way down to the pathway. So this is like one example. Another example would be in imaging technologies. It shows a great promise there. So we will see that incorporated, embedded into the existing technology. Third one would be, for example, there's a couple of it, like in clinical trials, like processing, collecting huge amounts of digital data that we call digital endpoints. So that could revolutionize the whole preclinical clinical trials industry. So I would maybe at this point, off the top of my head, I would pinpoint those three.
Okay, so of those three, which ones need to explain how the AI works? Because is it just matter if the results are there? Does it matter how it got there?
Well, yeah, it needs to explain.
So
in
even
both
in drug discovery, if it works, it works, no? Or does you need to explain it?
Yeah, each technology must be explained. So the problem with AI is that for most of tasks in healthcare and life sciences, you cannot use some simple methods like linear regression. Okay, that's explainable, but you cannot do much with it. You need neural networks. You need complex algorithms that are basically black boxes. So that raises a large amount of questions in that field regarding explainability, ethics, and all those things. So it needs to be explainable to be widely adopted.
What about imaging, where you have an identification of something? It narrows down to the wall of a colon through an AI imaging one that a practitioner might not be able to grab, or a radiology X-ray. Does that need to be explainable?
Yeah, sure. Because I will give you two examples. The first example, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it perfectly illustrates this. Like, there was a United States Army tested AI to recognize images of tanks, and they tested like United States tanks and Russian tanks. And AI did it excellent. Like it recognized both of types of tanks perfectly. But when they tested it in real life, it completely flopped. So they debugged and investigated, and it turned out that AI concluded that a tank is a Russian tank if the sky is gray. So if it's cloudy, so it's a Russian tank. If it's nice blue sky, it's American tank. So either or not it is true, it illustrates the point. And another one that is definitely true, AI was used to recognize pneumonia patients from 2 hospitals. And it performed great, but when they tested it, it flopped too. So what was the point? The problem was that AI was recognizing the mark on the X-ray that marked from which hospital the X-ray was, because from one hospital there was a bunch of patients who had pneumonia, and from other it was like no pneumonia. So it concluded that if a patient is from hospital number 1, probably is pneumonia, and from hospital 2, is not pneumonia. So we need to understand how the AI makes that decision. So those examples illustrate like
it's almost that it's a backup or a second check to your data selection and inclusion criteria. What do you include or not, or how relevant is the data or clean the data is?
Well, yeah, but also to understand based on which points does the algorithm draw some conclusion.
So let's take a case of, let's take maybe 2 cases. From a practitioner's perspective, they're introduced to, let's say that they're in a development phase versus a here you go, it's done phase. What is important for the practitioner then? I mean, what do they need to understand? And is explainability the same as being a white box?
Yeah, but there's you're right, but there's one thing besides that, and that the AI is always lacking a context. So you as a clinician set the diagnosis based on, for example, AI, X-ray, but also you base your diagnosis on anamnesis. So it's not like you just look at the X-ray and you will say, oh, this is a fracture, tumor, or something like that. But the AI cannot comprehend the whole context. So the AI is only watching one small fraction of the whole complete picture. So it's a perfect as a decision support tool, but not as a decision maker, because it will be, it's a long way to go to that point that doctor will say, okay, I believe AI in, full diagnosis, so.
I'm building a new AI. It's in orthopedics. It tells you where to cut. What do you want? What do you want to see when I come to you as a product technologist entrepreneur and I say, what do you think about this idea? What things do you want to see? And that's maybe generalized, and also specific for AI. Yeah. Or is there anything specific? Is it always the same?
Yeah, I would first ask you, based on what? It tells you where to cut based on what? What is the data that the AI knows that I don't know? So the problem here is added value. And when you're building an AI product, you have to find a very narrow niche to incorporate the AI into the workflow of, for example, clinicians, because, we do that, job for years. So you are, for example, you come to me and say, okay, this AI knows this the best in the world. So in other words, I built an AI that knows your job better than you. better than you do. So it's like you have to take into account the human aspect of the whole story, you know.
So is it enough to see just the results that it works? Here's the results, the clinical studies, everything else, or how it functions? Because I could come and say, look, it's 98% average, percent accurate, and it was done on 10,000 patients.
Yeah.
What's still, is that enough, or is something else missing for you to gain that trust?
The problem is that 2% that it doesn't work. So in each 100 patients that I treat, this won't work in 2 patients. What does that mean for me as a clinician? Possible lawsuit, possible problems. So, you know, people who practice medicine, we always have to look at that side. So the problem is when you say something is working in 98%, but you don't explain to the end user based on what does that AI, draw its conclusions on.
So let's take two sides of that. You have the practitioner, and you have the patient. When you're talking about that 2% with the patient, what does that mean? Like, what do they need to see? I know it's broad. There's a lot of ways we can apply these things, either in imaging or in kind of, when we're talking specifically kind of patient touching activities, what needs to be seen, like what matters to the patient from understanding and that they need to see?
Yeah, well, the doctor needs to explain to the patient the AI. So the doctor must be familiar with it and comfortable with it. To say, patient, okay, we are using this AI tool that will give you or improve this, and that. But okay, in 2% of the cases, it won't work. But it has to be decided based case by case. Because if you have, for example, we have stem cell treatment for osteoarthritis in the knee. So it works in 75% of the cases. In 25% cases, it doesn't work. But it doesn't do harm in 25% of the cases. So it's just, it's in 75% of the cases, the patient will be better. In 25, nothing will happen. So this is one case. But there are many cases that it could go very bad for the patient. So we have to decide case by case, clinical areas and diagnostic and therapeutic areas where we apply that AI. If it's not critical, then it's not such a big problem. But if it's a critical area, then, it's very problematic.
So is there an example of a white box? So coming back to this concept again of white box and explainable AI, is that one and the same, or are they different?
No, there is some difference. So basically, complex algorithms, complex neural networks are, as we call it, black boxes. So we know the input, we know the output, but in between, we are not quite sure what's happening deep inside those neural nodes in the middle. So there are two possible approaches how to solve that. Either while you're building your black box, on top of it, you're building a white box algorithm who is somewhat simpler, but takes basically the same data, not to go too into details. But that white box is like a tool to understand the black box. So we're making it in parallel, so to say. And another approach is to make an explainable AI, so that it's not a black box, but it's, from the start, it's like a white box, so we can understand all the intricacies. The problem is that, as we talked earlier, most of the complex algorithms are very hard to explain. So it takes an additional effort from the developer's side to make something like that. If possible. So there is some percentage of cases that it won't be explainable, and we would have to accept it, So it's just that in which areas can that be accepted? So, okay, if you're like recognizing cats and dogs, so basically we don't have to explain it. But in some critical system or some critical triaging system or anything like that, it really has to be explainable because people, health and lives depend on it.
So what do you see as the role of the practitioner when developing an AI then? Are they driving what's in the white box? Who drives that?
Well, for different stakeholders, there are different white boxes. So for programmers have their own white box regarding, the tag, the algorithm, the inner intricacies. For clinician, the white box refers to, okay, on which data did you build your data set? What did you do? Is it tested? How thoroughly it's tested? How big were those samples? So if you tell, we tested on 30 samples, that's nothing. But if you say, okay, we have a study of 50,000, participants, so that's something different. So this AI is based on this and this, and it concluded. So if if that aligns with existing learning pathways of the clinicians, that would increase adoption.
So does that mean there's an evolution of the practitioner with AI? I mean, it's still a tool, right?
Yeah.
So is there an evolution, or is it basically just familiarization with some?
It's evolution. It's evolution because more and more practitioners will have to be familiarized with technology. 20 years ago, it was like a typing machine and fax machines and stuff like that. So the technology is improving, it's developing. So practitioners who want to be at the top of their game, they have to be familiarized with current technological trends in medicine, starting with AI.
What about patient expectations? Like, what does it still? Is the dynamic of trust between the patient and practitioner changing, and is there a role of AI in that or not, or does it really come back down to, is it a believing patient or is it a skeptical patient?
Well, it all comes down to patient-doctor relationship, because if a patient believes a doctor, then AI is a tool as any other tool in medicine. So the same as you would, it's not totally the same, but like similar, you're using MRI or using some laboratory methods, it's like those are tools that clinician believes in and patient believes in clinician. So, it all comes down to that relationship of two human beings.
So a lot of times, AI outputs are a percentage. There's an 80% chance this is this. Yeah. And so then if you don't, if you're a patient going into this and they get something they don't want to hear, is that going to actually make the problem worse for them to try to find a solution?
Well, yeah, those percentages are like ruining our happiness in medicine. So, if you tell someone, it's like 80%, what about those 20%? The problem in healthcare in general, not related only to AI, that this is a very complex landscape. And the end, for example, in most cases, the end user is the patient. But the gatekeeper and the target audience are clinicians, because they serve as an intermediary between that technology and the end users, which are patients. So it's the doctor's responsibility to explain this methodology to the patient.
So what's your expectation from the programmers or developers, engineers that are developing this from your perspective as a practitioner? And what's your expectation from a regulatory agency as a practitioner?
Yeah, well, definitely explainable AI that will have 100% of accuracy. Just kidding, but as high as possible. And from the regulatory perspective, it's already happening. So we will see some advancements in that field. But from regulatory perspective, to standardize as much as possible, to make very clear frameworks for the development of AI tools, to be clear what things are to be done and what things are forbidden. So that is already happening. We European agencies, United States agencies are getting all those frameworks done, revisioned, and I think by the year 2024 it will be completely set up in as new frameworks for AI development in healthcare.
Okay, white box AIs, do they help in ethics or not? And is it manipulatable? Is it something where you can plausibly create a white box that says, look, I got my bases covered? Is there what's the ethical angle of white boxing?
Yeah, definitely. Because we had quite a few examples that people claimed to have done something with their AI and no one could replicate it. And they didn't want to reveal, maybe they even didn't know how the stuff works, but maybe they hid some part of it, so no one could replicate it. But with white boxing and displaying the whole story, these things cannot happen or happen much more seldom. But the problem is that you have to find the balance, because all the companies try to protect their IP. And with this explainability and forcing them to display what's inside, you're attacking that story. So we need to have really detailed frameworks about all of that to try to be successful in that field, and to be secure but not to hamper the innovation.
So what is there what point or two would be in that framework?
From the legal side, or you mean?
Well, in development, we're balancing this need of, I need to protect my innovation and the effort that I've invested innovation-wise versus ethically showing that it works. Is it going to change the regulatory process? Is it going to change the review process by practitioners?
Well, it's this regulatory thing. It's not so important for practitioners. Practitioners look to this RCTs, real world evidence, explainability of some general principles of this AI methods, because they cannot, delve into the technical details. But from the regulatory perspective, it will probably need to be some percentage regulated, and to leave some percentage, as IP or something like that. I'm not from legal and compliance. That's not my field. So I'm just.
Well, there's an argument that says, I could figure out the whole picture by just showing me 2% of it, right?
Well,
it's tricky.
Yeah. That's very complex thing, and it remains to be solved in the next couple of years. We will have some bumps on the road, definitely, but we are seeing initiatives from the United States and from the EU regarding this, and it will be sorted out in the next couple of years. So,
one of the advantages from an entrepreneurial perspective of using AI is it gives you a new approach to solving a certain problem. And that by virtue makes you a kind of a market maker. You are the first one to go into that market. But when you look at then, is it the fast followers could eat into that advantage pretty quickly because then they understand the general concept and construct of how you've approached and applied AI to a specific issue. So is it really we're just throwing the first entrepreneurs of this wave of people that are throwing themselves, over the edge, sacrificing themselves for the betterment of the medical kind of state of treatment, but in effect that they are not going to really monetize it.
Yeah, it appears that currently, if you are a fast follower, you are in better position because the regulatory side was not so precisely defined in some areas. So where the first wave, crashes, the fast followers can capitalize on that.
So it actually skews to those that can develop products within a larger ecosystem, like many large corporates, versus individual startups potentially. Because so many of these large companies will either have their internal development or use companies like HTEC to develop stuff. And it puts some of the disadvantage at the entrepreneurs from a dynamic. There's an interesting statistic that came out about the amount of healthcare investment kind of coming into who finances the innovation on this and what do they expect from having explainable AI. I think they're looking for a way that increases adoption and it creates a net positive value benefit that hospitals, practitioners, and others will want to pay for. But it eats into that competitiveness in kind of protective natures. So in the end, does something have to change with the dynamic between the practitioner and the technologist / entrepreneur and the health system that wants to incorporate a new technology?
As with other areas of technology, the landscape is complex here. So we have to understand that any innovation you want to start, it has to be aligned with interests of all stakeholders. So no matter that you have a great product and practitioners are delighted and patients are delighted, if there's no one who could pay for that, your product would not survive. So with AI as a tool and a technology, the story is the same as with any other tool in medicine, in medical landscape.
So coming back to this, and let's take the case. Everyone is using white boxes. Fast forward X number of months, years, whatever it takes. It's a standard practice. What differentiates a good white box and one that is not good? First from a practitioner, and let's distill that. Is it really just it comes into trust, right? Trust in related to efficacy and safety.
Yeah, well, definitely the size of training set, the size of test set, the size of randomized clinical trial, the amount of real-world evidence, the existence of influential early adopters, like, for example, Mayo Clinic. Okay, we have something that has a bunch of evidence, and Mayo Clinic started to use it, for example. So this is a game changer for any AI tool. And basically, it's the same as any other tool. So.
Well, we'll have to bring someone on from Mayo Clinic on this. But why would Mayo Clinic? What are they doing that's good that makes them influence acceptability by others?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned them as an example because they have their own accelerator. They have their own director of AI who is a radiologist. So they're like one of the influencers on that field by their authority in the AI area. So I just stated them as an example. There are many more examples.
So there's more. There's definitely
Yeah.
of course more. But just taking that aspect of institutions that innovate around AI in healthcare, even within them, the explainability factor has not become widespread yet.
Yes.
Is the white box? Is there any other role for the white box in terms of publications and at conferences? Will it become a new standard within conferences to say, here's the explainability subject to proprietary approaches, right? Is the nature of papers going to change because of this?
Definitely. Because we've seen over the previous years, like, okay, it's not like fake it till you make it, but it's a run. Like, let's make something that works and test it on, real world data. Oh, it works in 90% of the cases. So this was the primary goal. But now the situation is slowly changing. And as the AI goes more into mainstream, like to be embedded into hardware, into medical hardware, or stuff like that, it's becoming increasingly important to have that explainable as a part of mainstream. Because, for example, if you use ultrasound, we all know how that works. What's the technology behind? What are the details? Okay, we don't have to know the quantum state of, I don't know, different electrons or something like that. But we know the technology, how it works. So to that extent, the AI will have to be explainable, more or less. So we will see.
So will practitioners have to accept the fact that some things can't be explained? And what does that mean for building trust in the dynamic with the patient?
If it will depend on what's the risk of harming patients and what's the risk of practitioners becoming legally responsible for that. Because the practitioners are in specific situation. They have to make their decisions based on their clinical skills and different diagnostic tools. But the final word is theirs. So if the diagnosis is wrong, the clinician is responsible. Not, for example, an MRI device that didn't show some 3 voxels. The clinician is responsible. He cannot say, "Oh, well, that MRI didn't show." No, you didn't see it. So from legal perspective, you would have to, prove, but you are still legally responsible. Not, doesn't matter guilty or not, but you have that legal part in this whole story. So AI as a tool, it will have to be treated as any other diagnostic or therapeutic tool.
It's a broad area.
Yeah.
On the kind of, this factor on trust in healthcare is a major aspect of whether people will accept, first of all, diagnoses of what their issue is.
Yeah.
And then second, what is the proper treatment that they are triaged to?
Yeah, and that will be would a patient would rather be, diagnosed by a human doctor who could be wrong, or some AI? Or, as we spoke earlier, would a patient rather be operated by a human surgeon or a robot, AI-powered robot? So would you let your, fate in the hands of a machine or a human being?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, we accept a blood pressure cuff readings, with it, plus interpretation, of course.
Yes. Yes, but imagine, okay, someone broke the thigh bone, so it needs to be operated, treated by an intramedullary nail, would you rather be operated by a human surgeon or some AI-powered robot rig that could do this surgery in 3 minutes, but it's like only a robot? So, that's the story about planes. Airplanes can, basically fly the whole flight by themselves, like, lift off, fly and landing, everything. But companies don't want to do it because people are not, no one would like to, be on that plane that is, driven by a complete autopilot, no matter that autopilot would not make mistakes that human do. Yeah. But it's a matter of trust because the pilot is also human.
It'll be interesting to see what current autonomous taxis are doing and the impressions. So you have a lot of that right now in San Francisco in particular. Yeah. But that's basically, a less hazardous version, less catastrophic version potentially than the airline industry. Well, on these things in terms of what works and not, you look at, is there going to be, we look at blood sugar levels are a consensus opinion.
Of course, as any other laboratory measurement. Yeah.
So is there a new type of consensus opinion that will emerge around white boxes, or is that not really going to happen? It feels like when you get white boxes for everything and it becomes some standard of care, maybe there's an emergent consensus opinion. So people will agree maybe statistically on some aspects or another. What's the role of consensus opinion in white boxes?
Yeah, probably. There will be some standardization over time, as with other tools. Because if, the thing with ECG, ultrasound, CAT scan, MRI, those are all technologies that were existing years before their adoption into the healthcare. So, it just takes a lot of time. So AI, we saw hype in the AI space over the past years, but it will subside. It will be some stable development without the hype. And as the years go by, there will be standardizations and general consensuses, and as it flows into the mainstream.
So maybe you have the physiological effect, the treatment, the therapy, or the triage that happens. Underneath that, you have explainable. You have the white box and the explainability. And does that just eventually fade in the background? Because in the end, whether you're using AI as a tool or something else, what you're looking is the technique deliver the kind of output you're looking for. And then it becomes then you get secondary questions. What's really scalable? Like, can you scale the 600 dermatologists in NHS in the UK to cover everything? Or do you need technology augmentation or nurse augmentation to build that out?
Certainly, some aspects of it will fade away. And as we standardize it, we won't have to have all the bits explained to the microscopic level, but some overall generalized explainability will always be here.
So what should physicians, let's categorize some physicians. Those that are, let's say, early adopters and embracers. You have physicians who are already involved in research, but not familiar with AI. So they got a foot in practice and a foot in research. And then you have those that are pure practitioners that are basically follow the latest guidance, but they're much more, let's say, operational. What happens between them? What's their roles going forward? Is it?
Well, as with many of the things, I stated the stem cells as an example for treatment of osteoarthritis in the knee. You will always have some doctors or clinicians who would say, I don't believe in that. That doesn't work. And some that would say, oh, it works in basically all the cases, even more than it actually works. And you will have those people that are critical, and they will say, okay, if the diagnosis is this, then we will use this tool. If diagnosis is that, we will use that tool. So you will always have those few kinds of people in clinician space. And it will be the same as with AI. Someone would say, if you have, for example, an X-ray that would suggest the possible fracture or pathological change in the bone or in lungs, some doctors will say, okay, let's see, maybe it's something, maybe not. Some doctors will say, I don't need that. I watched a gazillion X-rays. I saw a gazillion X-rays. I don't need AI to tell me what to do. So you will always have that cases.
So let me summarize some of this. It feels like white boxes are a necessity because of this element of trust, and that percolates through primarily between starting at patients and providers and care and physicians. That will probably trigger into a regulatory view about what is going to become necessary, especially in more risky kinds of applications of AI. And then from a development perspective, you have to kind of very early on as part of the design thinking process, also look at the factors about what matters from an explainability or a white box side, and then build those tools. And granted, some of those tools, it's hard to explain some of the way that some of these aspects are learning. So it feels like that's almost going to be its own discipline. That's part design, part medicine, part technology, to basically kind of come out and say, this is what explainability means in order to pass this regulatory hurdle.
Yes, as we have like 3 classes of medical device, like class 1, 2, 3, different requirements would be set for those classes, for AI in those classes. So if AI is like class 1, like a wellness app or something like that, it's one set of requirements. But if you have an ambition of putting your AI methods into something that is class 3, that's a whole other story.
So FDA has released some guidance both at the beginning of last year in January, and they're continuing. It's an ongoing process, of course.
Yeah.
The 8 categories seemed pretty well, but they did not really go too deep into explainability. Does it really matter?
Yeah, because it's hard to define to what percent this has to be explainable. Is it 100% or 85% or 30%? But just to get back to our previous thought, the thing with, as you said, that it's like an area of engineering, of clinical practice, of the explainability will increase the development time, increase resources that are needed. And if you want to build something in this space, you will need to find teams that understand that deeply. Because now it won't be enough just to have a great, data science team or, AI team that, know how to build great algorithms. Now you have this regulatory perspective and the domain perspective. So you need to have a multidisciplinary team. It's not just engineering team anymore because of regulatory compliance, domain issues. So it will be a multidisciplinary project.
Well, I completely agree with that. It makes a question, though, because of the increased time and resources. Is there a perverse incentive for those to try to get into market quickly, before these become required?
The problem is when those changes become active in a regulatory framework, in order for you to keep your product on the market, you would have to retest it and comply with the new changes. So you can be quick and like launch a product, but then in year 2 or 3 years, you will again have to go through the process. So better be, thorough and make it right than do you have to because retrofitting is always, even more resource demand.
Well, this comes into the question about the role of white boxes in post-market surveillance.
Yeah.
So you're going to have, then you can kind of, you're going to have to show kind of impact on this one.
Yeah.
Well, and how much? I mean, if you have a black box and you have post-market surveillance, and you might just be getting lucky that you didn't hit specific cases that the algorithms wouldn't cover, or the data set has a health equity problem or a bias or some other aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, now it's difficult to predict what would be easier, because the changes and revisions of the framework are ongoing. So we don't know exactly what will be like in a year or two. What we have some data, but we cannot predict accurately. But from a clinician perspective and also software engineering perspective, it's better to build the proper explainable model as much as possible, explainable, than to have to retrofit or do a bunch of things from the start, or so it's in my 2 cents.
Okay, so can we propose? So from an explainability perspective, let me see if I could propose 4 things. As part of explainability and how the algorithms work, there you mentioned data set size, real world evidence. So what's the real
RCT.
Results over time in RCT?
Yeah.
And are there biases in selection and population representation, and let's call it clinical segmentation of patient degrees and stuff? So you put that's almost, you can actively create a new type of dashboard for each type of product that is actively showing you how the evolution of that product can go. You don't need to wait anymore, because you can actually do that in real time while the devices are all active everywhere. Now you have to get kind of the data permissions for that, but as a product innovator, you can now, it changes the notion of how product development happens, because now you can release updates to those algorithms based on the evolution of where you see the white boxing stuff, and you can create sandboxes to test other algorithms based on historical data. Now that's kind of rearward looking, of course, but that feels like that's the logical extension of white boxes.
Yeah, that when you mentioned updates, it triggered me. This is also one of the subjects and topics that we discuss a lot at the meetings. How big an update needs to be required for recertification or another study? So where is that border? What can you update? But so you can say, oh, the product is the same. When does that product become something else? How big the update is? So it's like a point for discussion.
Yeah, it is. It's a great point of discussion, and it makes sense that that both on the product development side and the regulatory side can use active views of patients. I think the paradigm changes completely now because we're connected. We can get data, and medical device manufacturers can ahead come to agreements about usage of data. So right now, what's the biggest challenge with many corporate medical device makers is they are trying, like they have 80% of their problems are legal because they have to get access to data to build AI insights and tools. But once you get one new product development, you can create a continuous system that says, look, we're monitoring this real world evidence. We've now released a new algorithm based on all the data that was ever run through the system previously and shows better results. And so that update that you mentioned is much more dynamic now.
Yeah. It's yet to be determined, probably case by case, area by area, because it's very difficult to standardize because all the algorithms, but it doesn't refer only to algorithms. It refers to all digital stuff like software as medical device, all software in digital area. So we will see in the future what the future brings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so any kind of final comments that you think are relevant? We covered quite a broad spat of things from differences in AI and healthcare to kind of regulatory tiers and looking at the roles of clinicians and patients and the 2% that matters when, what is the characterization of stuff that isn't caught by an AI? Any kind of final thoughts about what is ahead?
Well, the situation will evolve to that if you want to build something, as we already mentioned, you will have to build a multidisciplinary team to look to the problem from different perspectives, and only that will ensure the effective and fast way forward in the development of medical software and AI.
Without a doubt. Nemanja, thank you very much, and appreciate the time and the discussion.
Thank you.